Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. Looking back, how we cut through the financial propaganda, gave you the real deal. Stacy Herbert.
Yes, Max, this is the last Keiser Report of 2011, and we're going to look forward into 2012, as many are doing. But I want to look back to 2010 at the same time, when we were looking forward to what would happen with 2011. And first I want to turn to this little clip here, and we're discussing a story about Bank of America, and they had bought 439 URLs, like bankofamerica.sucks.com, bankofamerica.blows.com, brianmoynihansucks.com, and blows.com, in order to avoid any activists or global insurrection against banker occupation targeting them online. Here's your response to that.
So let me get this straight. Bank of America, to avoid a public relations problem, went out and bought brianmoynihansucks.com. The CEO of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, sucks. Brian Moynihan blows.com to avoid a public relations problem. And also, of course, in this propaganda war, you want to cover up your crimes of financial terrorism as best as you can, and the people on the internet who suss this stuff out quick, you try to divert attention from them, because God forbid Bank of America should be transparent or obey the law in any way, shape, or form. No, no, no. They want to blow themselves up and everyone around them, because Brian Moynihan sucks.com. What else you got? Now, Brian Moynihan is still there. Their share price, though, down below 6, touched $5 recently. So that's a form of propaganda, using URLs or domain names, or the absence of those who want to express their dissenting opinion to acquire domain names. And as a result, those who still own Bank of America stock got absolutely shellacked. We told you the truth. We could have helped you avoid a major beating.
Yes, and that's probably a theme we're still going to see going forward in 2012, Max, because the same guys are still there. Shareholders and, in fact, the Department of Justice refused to remove Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, which everybody knows was obviously a criminal enterprise. They're always settling lawsuits, civil lawsuits with the SEC. But he's still there, and because of that, because the shareholders will not force him out, they're down 60% on last year at this time.
Yeah, and there's talk amongst the banking analyst community that Bank of America stock is going to go to 50 cents a share in the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, the other thing you predicted, you forecasted from last year's New Year's Eve show, the second New Year's Eve show we did from London, where we were trapped during the snowstorm, was we covered a story from Francis Fukuyama, who had asked whether or not America was a plutocracy, and his conclusion was that yes, it was, that the rich have an outsized sort of power over the political process. Here's your response.
But it's beyond a plutocracy, Stacy Herbert. It's a kleptocracy. So it means that if anyone's earning $1 in America, that means that $10 are being stolen from them from the kleptocracy, and those people who earned $1 now have an additional $10 in debt. That's the difference between a kleptocracy and a plutocracy. Right. So once again, I'm proven to be more of an observer of social phenomenon than Francis Fukuyama, who's an overrated type. I said it's not a plutocracy, it's a kleptocracy, and who was right? Me again.
Yes, but the biggest story of 2011, Max, was rehypothecation. It came into the public domain in the collapse of MF Global. But you were predicting that there. You were saying that for every dollar that a banker steals from you, they actually leave you with $10 of debt because of their leveraging up on it.
Well, let's look at this for a second, because there's a myth out there. It's called fractional reserve banking, that a bank will have $1 of deposits and they'll issue $10 in loans. That's not the way it's done anymore. Banks have zero in deposits. They've all put their deposits outside of their balance sheet because it's considered too much of a liability. And they just make loans endogenously from nowhere, and they create a Ponzi scheme of multiple layers of debt. But now the new stage is to go even deeper with this rehypothecation scam. And we see this at JP Morgan. Not only don't they have any reserves, that they're not placing any collateral to make loans, but they're just stealing people's money out of their accounts as collateral to make loans off their balance sheet on the dark pools to offset their short silver positions and other nightmarish balance sheet items as a way to try to extricate themselves from their own fraud. So this is the trend going forward. It's not even zero reserve banking, it's negative reserve banking.
Well, let's see where this is going in the new year. Some of the predictions being made by banks and bloggers around the world. Saxo Bank outrageous predictions for 2012, the perfect storm. They predict EU declares extended bank holiday during 2012. They predict that the December EU treaty changes prove insufficient to solve EU funding needs, particularly those in Italy. And the EU debt crisis returns with a vengeance by mid-year. In response, the stock market finally caves in and drops 25% in short order.
I predict that the first country to declare a bank holiday will be the UK.
You predict that?
Absolutely.
Here's a headline from the news in the past week or two, which proves that they might actually be correct in predicting that it'll all center on Italy. Exclusive, Italian banks tap 116 billion euros of ECB loans. So for the first time ever, remember the ECB just issued 489 billion euros of 3-year loans. This was their first ever. For the life of the duration of the loan, it's 1%. But more than a dozen Italian banks, including top lenders Unicredit and Intesa Sanpaolo, tapped 116 billion euros of that. Their figure includes 40.4 billion euros of state-backed bonds, which were used as collateral for the loans. So they're issuing debt in Italy to send over to the ECB in exchange for more loans, which they can leverage up.
Is this banking or the Kama Sutra? I'd like to see a Kama Sutra of Italian banking positions. This is how they're basing their economy going forward. Tab A into slot B, you figure it out.
I actually make a prediction from your statement there, Max, that Silvio Berlusconi, who's now out of a job, well, you've just given him a job for 2012 to write the book, The Kama Sutra of Finance.
Silvio's bunga bunga of finance. Just look at the pictures and you'll throw up. And never try this type of leverage or rehypothecation at home.
Okay, well, the biggest amount, 12 billion euros of state-backed bonds, was taken up by Intesa Sanpaolo, which confirmed it had used them as collateral for the loans and said that these would help it complete pre-funding for its wholesale, medium, and long-term maturities. So where do you see this rehypothecation going, though? Where do you go once you've jumped the shark this far?
Well, in the case of Europe and the ECB, they are several years behind the Federal Reserve and the Treasury in terms of leveraging the balance sheet of the ECB. So they have 5 to 10 trillion in fresh loans, however they construct it, and whatever trick they may use, accounting methodology. They're going to leverage up the ECB's balance sheet by 5 to 10 trillion. And of course, remember, in the Eurozone, there's over 10,000 tons of gold. Italy's got over 2,500 tons of gold, so they can well do this. I think that the US dollar is a lot more risky than the euro, and certainly the British pound is as well. The euro will continue to hold its value on a relative basis.
Now it's time to cut to a little surprise because we didn't get it always all completely right. We weren't totally perfect. In fact, we have some bloopers from 2011, stuff that didn't make it to air. Here's our first one here.
What other completely incongruous factoid descends from your lips as we explore this global...
Is that an appropriate segue? I think you should come up with something else.
Okay. Yes, and what other two other sovereignty within that nation?
Why don't you just end on where you were talking? Why do we have to go into an elaborate fakakta nightmare?
Okay. Yes, well, and so Germany, of course, and there are 11 other countries, even more to them. That was good. Just cut it in. Go to the next story. Go ahead. Factless, yeah.
Oh, Max Keiser. So let's end this first section here on the predictions regarding the U.S. These were big predictions for 2011 that the U.S. would default, collapse, blah, blah, blah. This is another prediction for this year. Huffington Post predicts U.S. defaults on debt because they claim the danger of an accident caused by self-destructive partisan politics in the run-up to the 2012 presidential elections is very, very small. However, it is very real.
Look, the U.S. is not going to default on its debt. The U.S. can print lots of money. But what will happen, because the Federal Reserve has already expanded their balance sheet from $800 billion to almost $4 trillion, going from TARP forward, is we will see greater reliance on the IMF and the use of special drawing rights. So all of these central banks will kick the can down the road by rolling up all this toxic debt that they took from the toxic banks into toxic special drawing rights, collateralized bonds and notes, and there'll be a whole new generation of Ponzi scheming on top of this as the penultimate move by the central planners before they ultimately figure out that they have to go back to a gold standard.
Yes, but Max, don't you think, however, that you see so many absurd candidates spouting absurd, bizarre stuff in America that even though they can print money and they don't need to default, don't you think it might be so bonkers that you might have like this bizarre situation that they actually do?
Well, last year there was scuttlebutt that the various municipalities would default. Well, maybe 2012 is the year we see hundreds and hundreds of municipal bonds go belly up across the nation. And then it'll be interesting to see how the federal government deals with bankruptcy in 36 out of 50 U.S. states.
It might not default, but UBS predicts that perhaps U.S. 10-year Treasury yields break out. So right now they're saying that U.S. Treasuries remain among the safest assets in the world. They're considered safe. Everybody's buying them. The yields are driven down. But what could prove those investors wrong, UBS asks? They give a few reasons for the answers, but the one that's most interesting to me, they say, alternatively, the appeal of U.S. Treasuries could be eroded by common bond issuance in the Eurozone, creating the potential for a larger, homogeneous market for European government debt that could rival U.S. government hegemony. That, however, seems a remote possibility.
Well, this is what the currency war is all about. You know, a couple of years ago, it was thought that the euro would be a replacement for the dollar on the currency side. This was the reason why up to 30% of global trade was done in euros. Then the euro started to break apart or be challenged with all of these sovereign defaults being rumored and downgrades. But now the competition will be who can issue the most sovereign debt. So now Europe, in response to the erosion of the euro, is coming up with this federalization and fiscalization of their pan-European financial markets and central banks, and they'll create tranche after tranche. It's tranche warfare. Remember, World War I was trench warfare. In 2012, for World War III, the currency war, it's tranche warfare. So they'll come up with tranche after tranche of debt, and then the U.S. will have to respond, and then that will sink the U.S. Treasury market, and yields will go up, and we're talking inflation. So, Stacy Herbert, I know you're coming back after the break. By popular demand, no more guests on the show. We're just going with Stacy now for 2012. To hell with the guests. All right, don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser with Stacy Herbert. Time to find out what your predictions were at facebook.com/Max Keiser. Stacy Herbert.
Max, the most popular of the 64 predictions made by viewers of this program was from Ash Reza. Merkel and Sarkozy to release a sex tape.
Wow. They worked for Paris Hilton. And, I mean, if they were to release a sex tape, I'm sure it would get a tremendous amount of views on YouTube.
But speaking of releasing tapes online, I want to ask you about this, what you see for 2012 on the online distribution market, because there's a very interesting story that broke at the end of the year, and that was Louis C.K. I am giving away half of $1 million from live show. So this is comedian Louis C.K., and he announced he was giving away the lion's share. It's actually 75% because he himself is only taking $220,000 of the million for his own fee on the proceeds from his online-only stand-up comedy event live at the Beacon Theater. So here is what he himself, Louis C.K., wrote on his website. He said, "Hi, so it's been 12 days since the thing started, and yesterday we hit the crazy number, $1 million. Now, I'm going to break here for a second. he released this without any digital rights management on it, against the advice of his own advisors who said, no, everybody will release it on BitTorrent sites. You can't do this. And he said, no, I just want to make it as easy as possible. So instead, in 12 days, he made $1 million. That's a lot of money, really too much money. I've never had $1 million all of a sudden. And since we're all sharing this experience, and since it's really your money, I wanted to let you know what I'm going to do with it. And he's giving it away, a lot of it.
Well, this opens up a number of different issues. And Louis C.K. has really underlined some very interesting facts here. Number one, the push by the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA, to sue people for copyright infringement on the basis that it would destroy the industry and is anti-artist is false. Mm-hmm. Here you have an artist who went directly to the market, raised $1 million for their show, clearly making a huge profit motive, and they cut out all the middlemen. They cut out Hollywood. They cut out the ISP. They cut out all the digital rights management technologies that would be interfering and getting in the way. It also legitimizes, to a huge extent, BitTorrent. BitTorrent is the future. BitTorrent is part of a growing digital economy. To let the MPAA, they represent only 250,000 of Americans in Hollywood who make over-budgeted monstrosity of films at the expense of free speech and technological innovation. And innovation is a monstrosity. And he had legislation like Stop Online Piracy Act, which I don't think it got passed in the end because it's clearly not in the public's interest. So these are just 2 or 3 trends that this is now exemplifying. And another big one, an ancillary trend that I see moving forward in 2012 is the emergence of Bitcoins.
Yeah, well, let's stay on this story here because I think this is a very interesting one, and that is that Steve Jobs had made the same argument to the record industry. He said they're going to continue downloading your music illegally unless you offer them an easy way to purchase it. And this is what Louis C.K. has done. If you make it easy for the people to download and share amongst themselves, they will pay for it.
Well, it also disrupts the model of what's called the Hollywood model of spending 50% of the film's budget on marketing.
Yeah.
Let's take the latest Tom Cruise movie, for example. Maybe it costs $200 million to make. They'll spend $100 million on marketing to create that first weekend box office illusion of a success, and then they sell forward based on that and created illusion of success due to $100 million of marketing spend. Here's Louis C.K., who didn't spend any marketing dollars. He simply put out a product of quality. People paid for quality. That means that unless you're willing to come to market with quality, you're not going to get paid. So this is actually great for the artists. So that's a myth that the MPAA and the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America, like to put forward, that this is bad for artists. No, it's great for artists. They make lots more money than they would in the current system. This has got to be encouraged going forward.
And now let's turn back to some more viewer predictions, and this one comes from Leah Cabrera, and she predicts that John Corzine is acquitted on all counts of financial pedophilia.
Well, financial pedophilia is a new statute
that was first revealed here.
Yeah, we talked about it a couple of years ago, actually, and we had a legal scholar, talking about the introduction of financial pornography and pedophilia as a classification of financial crime as a deterrent. And he should be brought up on financial pedophilia, and he will get off because Jamie Dimon will just make a call to whoever he needs to make a call to, and he'll get off scot-free.
But let's move on to the other big prediction. A lot of people, a lot of banks, a lot of bloggers are making this one. The Chinese economic miracle falters. Too many U.S. T-bills tying it to post-industrial Western economies is part of the reason. But in fact, they say that the most serious economic damage will come to Australia, who's basically gone long all in on this bet of China sustaining their economy and their housing market bubble.
Yeah, this is interesting because a couple of years ago, the theory was decoupling. That China's economy would grow fast and that it would leave America's economy in the dust. Then, as it started to come clearer that with all the ghost cities that were being built and the incredible lying by the government in terms of their GDP numbers, that the decoupling theory was rechristened as reverse decoupling. that the U.S. economy was going to grow in spite of a falling apart China. Now in 2012, what we have is a mutually destructive decoupling, mutual decoupling. Both China and the U.S. and those reliant on Chinese fake GDP reporting, like Australia and Canada, are all collapsing. So this is now the end of that last harbor of growth in those economies, China, Australia, Canada. You know, the Canadian real estate market, Vancouver, for example, is now on the descent. So now we're talking about a huge crash in Canadian real estate, as was predicted on this show.
Well, Max, it's not so cut and dry because two legendary investors who are right now, as we speak, in a war of words over this issue, Mark Faber, Jim Rogers clash over China and commodities, agree on gold. They're actually having a slanging match via the media. On CNBC, it started with Mark Faber, who said that he was more worried about a Chinese economic downturn than recession in Europe. Jim Rogers responded to that and said, Mark still does not understand China. There are going to be several hard landings in the next few years, but China's will be less hard overall than others, such as Greece and the US, he told CNBC. Mark responded saying, well, he's been wrong on lots of things, Jim Rogers.
Well, I think if you take them at the face value of their words, if Jim Rogers says there will be several hard landings, of China is included, then that's admitting that China's in for a hard landing. He's not saying that it's in for a soft landing, as he would have said maybe only 6 months ago. He's saying, yes, China will be in for a hard landing. This is an economy that's been growing at 9, 10, 12% a year for several years, so a hard landing in China would be catastrophic. So Jim Rogers, unless he is going to run into the tall weeds of non-accountability by saying that, well, give it 10 or 20 years, then it looks like Faber could have the upper hand here.
And I want to take this moment, Max, to turn to another blooper from the past year.
Look, those Somali pirates have the right idea. They loot the ships, and then they sell shares in the next ship that they're going to loot on an informal exchange like a Groupon or a Zynga or a Facebook share market or Shares Post. It's like an electronic internet-based market that only people who actually have a proven record of criminality are eligible to be involved with. And they take those public, the Somali pirates. And hold on a second. I'm watching it in my periphery vision, and you're kind of like got me going here. All right. So the periphery vision, the Somali pirates. The Somali pirates. They got the right idea. I didn't. Oh, I got back to the beginning. Oh, now I'm totally. How many minutes do we have on this?
Okay, we're already done. We've recorded for like 20 minutes.
We have 3 minutes.
It's going to be a special feature-length Keiser Report coming to a theater near you. Well, again, we were onto something. We could release a feature-length Keiser Report online, just like Louis C.K.
They should raise money to send us to Somalia to do a report on the pirates. You know, let's raise money on piratemyfilm.com.
I'm not going to Somalia. Anyway, you know, there are lots of predictions being made about elections. The U.S. election is, of course, the big one in the news. But I want to look at the French election because, of course, how the economy is doing and how people feel about the economy is very crucial whether an incumbent gets re-elected. French most gloomy about economy. So this is according to Ipsos Mori poll. And the two gloomiest on the economy are the Brits and French. Almost 1 in 10 Britons, or 9%, expect their economy to improve in the next 6 months, and only 10% would describe the economy in Britain as good. But there is more pessimism in France, as just 2% of the people are optimistic about the next 6 months, and only 7% said the French economy is good.
Well, you can't compare the French and the British because the French are big spoiled babies.
Yeah, but
everything is gloomy to them. If they're not getting some kind of freebie from the government at any given moment, they're gloomy and down in the mouth and having an existential crisis. I mean, they could be, you know, in the middle of Disneyland.
Well, but they're gloomier than normal, so that's why Sarkozy is far behind in the polls. He's predicted by every single poll that he's going to lose. This is unusual for an incumbent, but it's a desperate economic situation. An economy trumps. It's the economy, stupid, that's going to be proven once again in 2012 unless your opponent is beyond stupid. And that's what you're going to see in the U.S., I think.
There's a history in France of the polls notoriously being completely wrong. People say one thing and vote completely different because they're duplicitous. That's what duplicity is a French word.
Well, okay, so I said in the poll, 7% of the French people believe that the economy is good, compared to Germany, where 64% of the Germans believe their economy is good.
Well, that's right, because the Germans are always optimistic about the future. That's why they're able to engineer such fantastic engineering products.
Okay, finally, Max, let's turn to this one tiny little blooper, the last one here. Well, so he calls gold investors lunatics, okay? But so with that, Max, I want to turn to, hold on, I forgot what I was going to say. So I was
honey, you can do it.
Okay.
All right, Stacy Herbert, another great year coming up. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, well, goodbye. Have a nice year. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.